All right. So it's Memorial Day. Now, obviously, Memorial Day is about what can I tell you? It's about people who have served. We always think of World War II, but we are getting to that Vietnam War era, or maybe the Korean War. Gotta think of Rambo, and what is it? Brian Dennehy's character was in the Korean War, and Rambo was in the Vietnam War. Of course, I think of Apocalypse Now, but I mean, when we think of World War II, we think of, oh yes, that war, we fought the bad guys, and Vietnam War is like, oh shit, we fought the bad guys, but fuck. So it's the ugliness of war. I guess we now reflect upon. There's still like there's still maybe a village worth of people from World War II, but uh, I guess the only relative I could talk about is Uncle Gus, who served in World War II, and his wife and her boyfriend poisoned him, and that's how he died. Anyway, um, but I have to see Memorial Day differently as people who are gone and are no longer here. Now, I think around the summertime, was it summertime? It might have been late spring, early summer. Uh, Amelia Iniguez, she passed away at the age of 82. She was born in 1917. To give you a little context, because I put my photo album away, I packed it in the box. That's kind of what she looks like. There's me there looking awkward. So, my grandmother, Amelia, born in 1917, this is like 20, we're reflecting 25 years ago. Uh, so 25 years ago, she passed away to cancer. Oh, yeah. This is the music I think of because this is when she was 18 years old. But yeah, she was born in Tejas. I'm not well aware of what Texas was like with the what the community was like. I know in East Los Angeles, there used to be a lot of white people of all kinds: Irish, Polish, Swedish, Finnish, French, mostly Spaniard, Italian. It didn't matter which white, Scottish white. It didn't matter. All the whites were there. And as soon as we moved in, that's how they blockbusted their homes. But that was before. This was before all the blockbusting. So, uh, my grandmother got married to my grandfather, who was Peter. I had security guards in my family. I had people who kind of well-to-do. Now, the thing about my grandmother, my mom told me these stories years ago that when my grandmother was young, there were different people. There was her cousin Carmen. I think she had to have passed away. If she hadn't passed away, if she attended my grandmother's funeral, there's no way she'd still be alive. 25 years later, no, there's no way. Um, so my great grandparents, that would be Marietta, my dad's grandmother, and then her husband. I don't remember her husband's name. Um, my great grandfather died and left the car in his wife's name, and the kids were bitter. I think around this time, because they were teenagers, they were bitter that my grandmother got the car, not them. So they took sugar. Okay, they take sugar, pour it into the gas tank of the car. So um, they poured it into the gas tank and ruined the car, because how dare he not leave them the car? Um, it's just bitter shit. That's just the way it was. I mean, there was just sibling rivalry. There was hatred, knives behind everyone's back, people hitting people, bossing people around. That sounds familiar. That sounds just like my damn family. And the tradition butt fuck continues, doesn't it? So yeah, my grandmother was a bitter old, well, not bitter and mean to everybody, but she was just like, I don't know. She got married to my grandfather. I don't know how old she was. I would assume in the late 30s, the late 1930s or the early 1940s. And my father was born She dressed him up like a little girl. I talked about this on Grandparents' Day post. Maybe I'll put a link in the description for Grandparents' Day, and you can get a little more because I've forgotten some details over time. But he dressed up my dad to be a little girl for the first 4 years of his life. Fucked him up. Okay. His brother probably called him all kinds of homosexual slurs and kicked him around, and that was it. He had my dad had a very traumatic childhood and decided to give me a traumatic childhood because you only get one childhood, right? So at some point, my grandmother divorced my grandpa Peter and married a man like my dad's age. My dad never spoke to my grandma again for a long time, for 10 years at least. And then the guy she married um, left her for a 15-year-old in Guadalajara, somewhere south of the border. And that was back in the 1960s, 70s, maybe a decade before I was born. So when I think of my grandmother, I think of those. Well, this is what I think of my grandmother, okay? Because she just didn't want to be married anymore, okay? She back then when you got married, you were doing whatever the fuck you were supposed to do. You're supposed to marry that you're supposed to pay the dowry, okay? Back in the old days, I don't know if you're all familiar with this, okay? But especially for any white people that I'm talking to, any white American bred, you would put a woman on a soapbox, okay? And you would auction her off like property, okay? Who wants this one? Okay. Here we got a redhead. Here we got a blonde. Here we got a brunette. Okay, what do I hear? Well, I hear $1. Who's got $2? $2. $5. Okay, $10. That's how people got married. Because you needed farmhands. You needed more farmhands. So you impregnate the wife, you have a bunch of kids, and that was it. Okay, you can't vote, you can't buy land, but you can sure we can get some farmhands. And then if you wanted to rape and beat up your wife for a kicks, yeah, you could do that, sure. And that was before the 20th century. So a lot of things had changed, okay? But people were still traditional. And my grandmother married my grandpa to be traditional, okay? And she hated it. Of course they did. Nobody liked getting married, okay? My cousin Guillermo, or we call him Memo, is the only one that doesn't seem to mind being married. Okay. But it really has not worked out for most of us, okay? It really, really fucking hasn't, okay? Um, Marriage is a very, don't look to my family or me. I've said this time and time again. Don't look to us for marriage advice, for we cannot give you any except to not do it. So when I think of my grandmother, I in the beginning, because I kind of knew her, uh, so we would spend, I mean, outside the house I grew up, we would have Saturdays or Sunday mornings out in the patio, in the backyard of the house. And this is the house on Eastern Avenue. This is the house I grew up in, not this one. So I'm just using examples here. So let's pretend she kind of looks like the woman I showed you, like this. So my grandmother Amelia would bring her mom. They would come over every weekend or every other weekend. 'Cause I barely saw this woman. Okay, I barely saw her, and she passed away when I was 7 years old. Okay. My mother told me that I would act up in the store and she would smack me good. Yeah, I mean back then they'd spank your ass and that's it. I mean, uh, no, it's just what a different time. So my grandmother would come over. She'd bring over some Lay's potato chips. Don't know if she had any music, but we had the TV though. We'd have the old television set kind of hanging above because my dad would weld together like steel structures. He was a welder in his free time, which is a good trade. It's just not a trade I would particularly be interested in. But he put a shelf together, and it would be about 7 to 8 feet tall, and he would put the TV there, and we would watch the Munsters, or maybe the Three Stooges, or probably Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. But let's go back to her neighborhood, kind of close to where our house was. So my grandmother, where we lived, she lived about maybe 2 miles at most away from where we were. And so my father talked to her again. There was a time where he was buying her nice presents on Mother's Day. And one time she screamed at my dad for stuff that he didn't do right. Kind of sounds like my mom. Um, and he had bought her a tennis bracelet that was like 24 karat gold or some like really expensive, okay? Really expensive jewelry. And she got into a real enraged argument, okay? Heated at each other's throats argument for probably over stupid shit that doesn't fucking matter, knowing this family. So he gave my mom the tennis bracelet, and he gave his mom a pair of slippers. Like, here, Mother's Day. There you go. That was that. Um, there were just awkward times, and when we go back to this house, okay, and I kept changing the subject here, but there were the happy times, but there were also the times, and this was when my sisters were younger. Okay, this was in the early '70s, where we go back to my grandmother's house. My grandmother had all kinds of parties. All kinds of ridiculous men would be at her house. Maybe some live music. I don't know. Things were different back then. All kinds of people there. So I don't know what exactly happened. My sisters were, let me think. They were in their late, they were either 12 or 13, 11, 12 or 13. Um, My youngest sister would probably be 6 or 7. So there's all kinds of creepy old men there. You don't know what's going on, how much drugs was involved, alcohol, cigarettes, maybe some cannabis. I don't know. But in any party, if you've ever been in East LA, you hear a lot, like you hear a lot of music, you hear a lot of things, something going on. Okay. And if my grandmother was supposed to watch those kids, and by the way, I still remember the story. My sister would tell me that she was trying to poison us. Like, you eat this thing, and no, you eat that thing, and I was like, okay, something going on there, where it's like I would have cake, and my other sister would have pie. So some sort of berry pie, something like that. So like there was a blueberry pie, and so um, my youngest sister was supposed to eat a blueberry pie or blackberry pie, and I'm supposed to eat a cake. And she was trying to kind of separate us, saying, "Oh no, no, you're supposed to eat this, and you're supposed to eat that." And that's what my sister was suspecting, that either she was poisoning the both of us or one of us. That's a sure kind of a thing to kind of get. I don't know what that was about. I don't know if my sister said something bad about her cooking, or I said something bad about her cooking, or but keep in mind I was too little to remember anything, so maybe it was on my sister. Who knows? If my youngest sister talked shit about my grandmother's cooking, about her grandmother's cooking, um, yeah, I could see her trying to do that. Now, what you're looking at here is a dog that looks like a fucking mop. Now that's Bestucci. Bestucci, actually, the real Bestucci had a dirty, ugly color, like blacks and like salt and pepper, blacks and whites and speckled gray. And I would never see that dog move. Like, think of a flat hand, right? And then you approach it and it goes, like, it would just move around like a mop that's like has no legs, but it's just bouncing up and down and moving around. And I think it got into a fight with a Doberman, and then the dog died. So that was the end of Pastucci. Then we got my grandmother. So in 1988, we got my grandmother a Dachshund, Tobias. And after my grandmother died, we kept Tobias. We kept Toby in our front yard. And then my grandmother had the kind leisure of backing into the dog and not paying attention where the dog was. And so Tobias died from my mom hitting him with the truck by accident. Way to go! That was great. You killed the dog off. The dog was in our custody for less than a year, and you killed the dog with your truck. Thanks. My mom also backed into the metal gate, when it was locked and closed, and didn't even pay attention to it, even though she's looking in that direction. I don't understand. I don't. Ah, yes. So, my early memories, I used to kiss my grandmother on the lips. I think my dad didn't like that. which is fine. I mean, it's just weird. I don't know. When I was a kid, I think that stopped. That whole thing stopped when I was 7 or 8 years old, going to third grade. Okay. So this is ribbon candy. One of the things I remember my grandmother having was this jar. Okay, it was a closed jar, and in this jar would be ribbon candy. Um, and it's like, okay, it would be all just like in The Simpsons, right? When Bart Simpson tries to make money, and the old, was it Cloris Leachman? Uh, she would have like ribbon candy, and it's all stuck together. Like that ribbon candy was all stuck together. This is what grandmothers would eat. I'm like, yeah, yeah, that's the kind of candy grandmas would have. Ribbon candy all stuck in a clusterfuck. So there was that. Of course, there were times when my grandma would also she also have lottery tickets. So you're not truly Mexican until you have a lottery ticket scratcher in your like on your table. That's how you know, right? So she did. She got me what we call did me a solid and actually got me one or two. I actually won $40, but that was after a couple of years of not winning anything. So the $40 hardly meant much except bragging rights, honestly. When I was going to a all boys school, Catholic school, every Sunday we'd work at the swap meet and we worked to death from 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon and pack up in the heavy hot sun, go back in the truck or van. I'm sorry, the van, Dodge white van, and drive home. And we would see my grandmother every Sunday afternoon up until her death. I'm guessing it was cigarettes, but my grandmother got sick with cancer, and it got to the point where she couldn't even move around on her own anymore. And somehow, I guess it affected her bowels. Just complications with anything. Stop smoking, yeah, no shit, stop smoking. But no nobody in my family really exercised except maybe Memo, my cousin. So yeah, I mean, she had hard times. It got to the point where Granny's in a she's my grandmother was in a wheelchair. Now she had to wear diapers too. Okay. Um, and I think my dad got so pissed off. At some point, he's like, we're gonna take you somewhere." So he decided to take her to a nursing home where they could immediately tend to her. Because here was the thing. My dad had a temper and a half. Okay, you knew that when he beat the crap out of you if you got bad grades in school. Okay, I talked about my father. Um, so my grandmother could not go to the bathroom on her own, and she couldn't walk around. So we had to give her a diaper. Um, I can kind of understand that on a third grade level. I don't know if I'll ever talk about that. It's kind of personal for me, but I understood that for a brief time. My grandmother was dying though, and she had to use the diaper. Okay, and there were moments where we went to Coco's or Marie Callender's, and my grandmother would just go to the bathroom, or I think it was IHOP, and she would just go to the bathroom and like as we're just sitting there like having breakfast, I just kind of lost my appetite at that point. But what can you do, right? So my dad had to watch her one day, and he had to change her diaper 6 times. This is, I mean, it's really it's hard, right? Because you're she's in her 80s at this point. This is the 90s, okay? This is like 1997, 98. He was pissed off, okay? I was about 19 or 20, all right? Uh, I was 21 when she died. So my dad at first put her in a home because it's like we don't want to be watching you. You can't defend yourself. It doesn't take much for somebody to go and break into your house, and you're just gonna sit there and watch everybody steal things from the house. So he had to be on guard and watch her. So my dad had to watch that. My his. I still remember the time that my grandmother drove. Oh, my grandmother drove. Oh, okay. So she was getting worse and worse until a nurse took care of her. But let me talk about the 2 car accidents she had. So the first one, she just rear-ended the guy. Nothing too dramatic as this, but she rear ended the guy, and I think it was some Asian dude, and he threatened to sue her for everything. My grandmother was a landlord of um not a I don't think it's a complex. It's not like an arms, right? It's a series of houses, like a duplex, I think. Series of houses. And he was going to sue her for everything. My grandmother signed the deed to the duplex in my dad's name, so my dad would be the landlord. Since the guy was not suing my dad took over. So she gave it to her son to take over. Then there was another accident, and this happened when I was 13, and Bertha was a tenant, and she was kind of friends with my grandmother. She turned left, or she turned no, she turned no, it was a left turn, and I don't know what she was doing. Either she was getting onto a into a parking lot, or she was leaving a parking lot, and some other person just smacked that passenger side so bad. Bertha was in critical condition. She passed away at the age of, I think, in her early 70s. Okay, she was in her early 70s when she died. My oldest sister really enjoyed her company. I would say, I mean, like when my sister's with my mom, my oldest sister, it's manipulative to say the least. This was more objective, affectionate, but she enjoyed being around Bertha, and the fact that my grandmother cowardly drove so that the car would hit the passenger side, from what I could tell, was shit. But the worst thing was she died in a hospital that was so poorly run, General Hospital, that the Northridge earthquake destroyed. Good, good. Didn't like that hospital. Would look like a fucking insane asylum. It looked like something out of The Shining, the first, not that remake in the '90s, but the first movie. It looked like something out of The Shining. It looked terrible. So, no, I mean, I don't think she cared that she got Bertha killed. Now, I like this image so much. Anyway, copy. It's watermarked too. Oh well, that sucks. Um, God, my grandmother was in so many convalescent hospitals. Shit. So my grandmother died at the age of 82 in late spring of 1999. Okay, and it was sad, but I she had she had one nurse take care of her, and that woman had to go back because she didn't get all her paperwork figured out. So for whatever, or her visa ran out. So her visa ran out, and she had to go back home. Then, what is it? I'm trying to remember. Then another nurse took over. I think she was African American, mostly English speaking. Like she, there are African Americans who speak only Spanish. Okay, like Celia Cruz. Okay, I mean, how black does she need to be African American? I mean, she spoke Spanish. She didn't speak English, but she spoke only Spanish. Um, so just seeing her at rest was tough. My father, I remember my dad once said, "Oh, she thought his mother was finally passed on." He said, "Oh, you poor thing, you poor thing." And then he moved. He's like, "Oh shit!" And then he said she wanted an egg salad sandwich or some kind. She would have my mom run errands, and my grandmother was always nosy. When my dad was repairing the sink or repairing the plumbing, repairing the gas, reinstalling a new water heater, uh, fixing the electrical wiring, installing a new telephone, putting something up. My grandmother would always like spy on him. He's just like, "Wow, will you please go away?" Like that was his attitude. So that was it. Should we just end on this image? I'll try to take this a little. Let's end on a cemetery look. All right. So I remember. Okay, so here were a couple of people that I never knew existed. Cousin Danny. Cousin Danny reminded me of Uncle Fester like what is his name? Uh, the actor who played Uncle Fester, right? Not oh God, not Fred Armisen, and not Rip Taylor from the cartoon, and oh, Jackie Coogan. Yeah, not Christopher Lloyd, but Jackie Coogan with that stupid hair wig. He kind of looked like Uncle Fester. He kind of walked like he had a hump, and he had one hand slightly longer than one arm was longer than the other, and he's like, "Oh, hey, how you doing? Oh, how you doing, mijo? Yeah, I'm your cousin Danny. Your father's cousin. He ever tell you about me? Oh, mijo, yeah, yeah, I'm your cousin, and it's great to see you. And yeah, I'm so sorry your grandma passed away, but I was a relative of hers, and I'm like, oh God, like these people that come out of fucking nowhere, right? And his mom was still alive at that time. So cousin Danny was in his 60s, his early 60s, and his mom was in her 90s, and she walked around, hobbled around like a wind up toy that just kind of bounces from side to side. And she would look at me and she goes, "Who's the young man? Who's the young man?" And they wanted to stay over at my grandmother's house for the night until the funeral, and my dad was like, "No, they cannot do that. I don't know these people. I don't trust these people. They're not staying over the house." Which okay. Um, you know, so because of that, my grandmother, my no, Danny's mother was there at the wake, but did not stay for the funeral. So only cousin Danny showed up, and he had, what do you tell me? He had two broken legs and a fractured knee. What does my dad say? How does a man walk? So he would talk to my dad. He would talk to other people. Oh yeah, it's great to see you, mijo. Oh yes, it's great. I just think of that. If you ever played Kid Icarus on the Game Boy, the second game, right? Kid Icarus 2, and you ever hear that game over music? I think of that game over music whenever I see cousin Danny. I would hear that da 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 da. You know, uh, I would hear that game over music because really it's like, what is going on here? Right. So I don't think he probably died. I don't think he would be in his 80s. He might still be alive, but I don't think so. There's a lot of people I haven't seen in decades. I don't know if they're still alive or not, but that's all I wanted to share. 27 minutes in. I didn't think I have a lot to say, but I had a whole lot to say. I don't really miss her. She was the last, I will say she was the last grandparent. I asked her about grandpa or other people, and she never talked about it. She was bitter about it. So I didn't know my other grandparents. My grandfather on my mom's side died before his mistress was at his deathbed and before I was born. Peter, my Amelia's husband, died before I was born. Uh, Actually, my mom's mom was alive. I was alive when she was, but she died when I was 2 years old. So didn't know anybody. This was the last of my grandparents, and that's it. Rest in peace. And nothing more to say. I hope you can take the time today to remember somebody who passed away. They don't have to serve. If they did serve, thank them for their service, for what we have today. And if they didn't serve, well, thank you for whatever, or not.